Working My Way Out of Trouble, written and illustrated by Persian Devla. Not too long ago, there was a boy named Gabriel, but his friends called him Gabe. This is a story about how he and his friends got into so much trouble but eventually worked their way out. The people that lived in Campbellstown were wonderful and very understanding. If ever Gabriel's ball landed in their yard, he would hop the fence and get it with no questions asked. Although his next door neighbor wasn't a very nice man. His name is Mr. Grover, but Gabe and his friends call him Mr. Crouch. Terry, Josh, Cody, Jeff, and Gabe were playing cricket in the backyard, hitting the ball far as they possibly could. Gabe's parents' house wasn't very big, but the land around it sure was spacious. They were really having lots of fun, and boy oh boy were they hitting the ball hard and far. Gabe was batting next and he thought he was doing a better job than the rest of his friends. With him giving it a go and feeling so good, he gave the next ball a cracker shot with his eyes closed. Then dead silence from the boys. Gee whiz, I must have really hit that ball far, he thought to himself. Suddenly the sound of shattering glass. In shock he opened his eyes, only to find the guys staring at Mr. Crouch's house with big googly eyes and jaws dropped. He turned around and looked in the direction of the boys to see what they were looking at. Oh no! I had just broken Mr. Crouch's bedroom window. What am I going to do now? He said. They all made their way to the fence in stunned silence, each of them looking at each other, waiting for someone to say something about what just happened. But nobody said anything. Gabe was hoping that either Terry or Josh would have a plan, but they too were either too scared or too stunned to say anything. Finally Gabe broke the silence. Do you think he'll notice? He said. Terry replied, well, he is old, so maybe he won't see the hole. They all turned looking at the damaged window, hoping it wouldn't be so bad, when suddenly they noticed Mr. Crouch staring at them through the hole in the window, ball in hand. Like lightning, Cody and Josh ran, leaving Terry, Jeff, and Gabe standing alone, shaking in their boots. Terry mumbled something they couldn't understand, thinking it had to be him praying, but they were too scared to even notice as they jumped the fence, heading towards Mr. Crouch's front door. They got there, and the wait was terrible. They knew they were in trouble. What made it worse was the door opening. And there stood Mr. Crouch. He had definitely been taking his afternoon nap when the ball broke through his window, as he had his eye mask around his neck and his slippers on. Which one of you boys decided to break my window? He said. Terry pointed to Gabe and he felt his heart sink. Gabe thought Terry would cover up for him. "I did, Mr. Grover," said Gabe. "And why did you do that, Gabriel?" asked Mr. Grover. "I didn't mean to, sir. It was an accident, I promise," said Gabe. Mr. Grover looked at Gabriel, seeming to wonder to himself if he was telling the truth, so Gabe decided to explain. "You see, we were playing cricket and I was feeling great about how well I was doing, and I tried to knock the ball as hard as I could. I didn't think it would hit your window," Gabe said. This seemed to settle Mr. Grover, as he said, "Hmm, all right then. But doesn't mean my window is now fixed. Who's going to repair my window?" Terry and Josh looked at each other. They didn't think of that. Who would fix the window? After a moment of silence, Mr. Grover said, "Come inside. I need to make a phone call. I don't want you two running away." After what seemed like forever, Mr. Grover came back, sat on the chair, and said, "I just had a word with your father, and he suggested that in order for you to learn a lesson, you should work for paying for the window." Gabe's heart sank. "Well, there goes my weekends," Gabe thought. Over the next few weeks, Mr. Grover had Gabe doing all kinds of garden work, from cutting the grass to pulling weeds and cleaning out the bins. It was hard work, but finally one day, about 4 weeks later, Mr. Grover said that Gabe had done enough work in order to pay for the window and that he would have it fixed the next week. Gabriel went back to his normal life, playing outside and still getting into trouble once in a while, but never with Mr. Grover. Mr. Grover seemed to be more understanding when a ball would come into his yard, or we would ask him if we could borrow his spare cricket bat. In the end, it seemed to have all worked out. Gabe learned a lesson about where he should aim his shots, and also to take responsibility for his actions, not to run away from the problem. The end.